I never expected my own mother to betray me. Pause, the words feel strange even to say aloud now, but that morning, I could feel it in my gut. She called me into what she called a family meeting, her voice warm, casual, the kind of tone that used to make me relax and feel safe. But this time, something was off. Something subtle, like a shadow stretching across the edges of a familiar room. I tried to shake it, telling myself it was nothing, just nerves. I walked into the living room, and immediately, the tension hit me like a wall. The entire family was there. Not just my mom, but cousins, aunts, siblings. I counted every familiar face, all of them pretending to smile. The smiles didn't reach their eyes. I noticed the flickers, the tiny shifts in posture, the way their hands rested just a little too tensely on the table. Something was brewing. I felt the weight of it before I even heard a word. The air was thick, heavy, suffocating, like I had stepped into a storm I couldn't see but could feel pressing on me from every side. I quickly realized this wasn't about love, not really. It wasn't about reunion or catching up on life. This was about something far more tangible, far more dangerous, my father's inheritance. The money he had left me, the life he had worked for, suddenly became the invisible target pinned to my chest. I could feel eyes darting, measuring me, analyzing my every movement. They were circling me, like predators in a way I never imagined. And my mom, my own mother, was leading the charge. They began casually suggesting I help the family, using words like generosity, loyalty, and duty. Phrases that seemed innocent on the surface were loaded with expectation, with pressure. "It's only fair if we all share it," one cousin said. "You know Dad wanted everyone to be happy," another added. I felt a tight knot forming in my stomach. Every word, every subtle glance, was a test. How far would I bend? Would I fold? They weren't asking, they were expecting. And I realized, painfully, that this was a trap, a careful, meticulously planned trap designed to see how I would react. I tried to keep calm, to breathe through the panic rising inside me. I reminded myself that I had handled difficult situations before, that I could be rational and smart. But in this moment, it didn't matter. They knew me too well. They knew my weaknesses, my sense of fairness, my hope that family could still be family. And they were exploiting it, one phrase at a time. I felt like I was on a tightrope, high above ground, with every step being watched, analyzed, ready to be used against me. My heart pounded as I realized I had to decide quickly, fight or fold. Every instinct screamed at me, warning that one wrong move could cost me everything, my inheritance, my dignity, even the illusion of family I had held on to. I looked around the room, seeing familiar faces turn into potential threats, smiles concealing ambition, love twisted into expectation. And then it hit me, this was more than just money. It was a test of trust, of control, of how far they could push me before I broke. I swallowed hard, my pulse racing. I couldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. I couldn't let my mother's careful manipulation succeed. But I also knew that any hasty move could make things worse. My mind raced, calculating, analyzing, preparing for every possible scenario. I had to be strategic. I had to survive this meeting without losing everything my father had left me. I could feel their eyes on me, waiting for my reaction, probing for hesitation. And in that moment, I knew that the family I thought I knew was a battlefield, and I was standing right in the center of it. I took a slow breath, trying to steady myself. Pause, I had no idea how this meeting would end, or what tricks my own mother had in store. All I knew was that I couldn't let them see fear. Not now. Not ever. Growing up, I always thought our family was close, bound by love, trust, and shared memories. Pause, I believed in the warmth of my mom's guidance, the safety of her presence, and the comfort of her advice. She was my protector, my anchor in a world that often felt unpredictable. Her smile could calm storms, or so I thought. But over the years, I began noticing small cracks, small things that seemed insignificant at the time, like cousins who only visited when there was a party, or siblings who acted differently depending on who was around. Back then, I dismissed it. I told myself family dynamics were complicated, that everyone had flaws, that love could exist even with tension. Then my father passed away. Everything shifted. Suddenly, I was the sole heir to his estate, a significant inheritance that I had never expected to handle alone. The dynamic changed almost overnight. Cousins I barely knew began acting overly familiar, hovering in ways that made me uncomfortable. Siblings who had ignored my presence for years suddenly became experts on what I should do with the money. Advice flowed constantly, disguised as care, but I could feel the subtle pressure beneath their words. Each conversation left me questioning motives, wondering if the smiles were genuine or strategic. The sense of safety I had felt in my family home started to crumble, replaced with unease and suspicion. I have always been cautious. Even before my father's passing, I made deliberate decisions about my life and finances. I studied, planned, and took care to avoid unnecessary risks. But suddenly, the stakes had changed. Money isn't just money, it is power, influence, and, sometimes, the measure of loyalty. I realized that with the inheritance came attention I hadn't asked for, pressure I hadn't anticipated, and motives I hadn't accounted for. I started observing people more closely. A shift in tone, a hesitation in a glance, a quick smile that didn't reach the eyes, each became a potential clue. And then there was my mom. The person I had trusted above all. The one I believed would protect me no matter what. But in this moment, she was orchestrating a meeting that suddenly felt like a test, a challenge, a trap. Her questions were careful, measured, almost casual. But her eyes told a different story. I noticed the subtle way she leaned forward, the pauses she inserted, the way her words tried to steer me toward a decision that would benefit everyone but me. My heart sank. I realized that the person I relied on most might also be the one subtly pressuring me, guiding me into a corner without me even realizing it. The room felt smaller with every passing second. The walls seemed to close in, the air thickened, and the smiles around me no longer offered comfort. I began to see the family I had loved all my life in a different light, not as a source of safety, but as a potential threat to my autonomy. The people I trusted, the people I celebrated holidays with, the people I had shared secrets with, they suddenly seemed like players in a game I didn't agree to join. The realization was chilling. I shifted in my chair, trying to mask the unease I felt building inside me. I couldn't afford to reveal my thoughts yet. Every movement, every glance, could be interpreted. My mind raced through years of memories, trying to reconcile the warm moments with the subtle manipulations. Could this really be happening? Was the family I loved now the very family I had to guard myself against? The line between love and strategy blurred, and the unease became a weight pressing down on my chest. And then my mom smiled at me in a way that sent a chill down my spine. It was warm on the surface, familiar, the kind of smile that once reassured me. But this time, it felt different, calculated, deliberate, almost predatory. My stomach tightened as I realized I was truly in the middle of a situation that could change everything. The conversation started casually, almost too casually, as though nothing serious was about to happen. We exchanged small talk, talking about the weather, work, and family events, but every word felt like a test. I could sense a tension beneath the surface, like the calm before a storm. Every smile seemed rehearsed, every question carefully phrased. I tried to stay relaxed, nodding politely, pretending that nothing felt off, but my pulse was already picking up. The room, once familiar and comforting, now felt like a battlefield, each person quietly sizing me up. Then the questions came, subtle but loaded with pressure. "Wouldn't it be better if we all shared Dad's estate?" one cousin asked. "You've always been so generous, why not help us now?" another added. Their words weren't innocent, they were crafted to make me doubt myself, to make me question whether I was being selfish. Each phrase felt like a probe, a gentle push to see if I would flinch, hesitate, or give in. I could feel the undercurrent of manipulation, the hidden expectation that I would surrender without realizing it. It hit me then. My inheritance had become the weapon in their hands. Money that was meant to secure my future was now a tool to control me. Every glance, every casual comment, was part of a strategy to make me fold. I realized I couldn't react emotionally. I had to remain calm, deliberate, and measured. But the room felt smaller with every passing second, like the walls themselves were closing in. I could see the subtle alliances forming, whispers passing between cousins and siblings, all while maintaining the facade of a normal family discussion. Guilt and loyalty were their ammunition. They reminded me of the past, of shared memories and sacrifices, of my father's wishes, of the importance of family harmony. Each statement was designed to trigger an emotional response, to make me second-guess my judgment. My chest tightened as I processed the layers of manipulation, realizing that any response could be twisted, any hesitation could be used against me. I had to carefully navigate a minefield of expectations, where one wrong word could fracture relationships permanently, or worse, cost me everything my father had left me. I started mentally mapping my options, running through every scenario. If I agreed, even partially, the precedent would be set, and I would be vulnerable to further pressure. If I stood firm, I risked angering those I loved and possibly creating a permanent rift. The weight of the decision pressed down on me, making it hard to breathe. I realized that this wasn't just a conversation, it was a test of my resilience, of my ability to protect myself in the face of subtle manipulation. Every movement, every blink, every slight pause was being noticed and interpreted. Despite the anxiety, I tried to ground myself. I reminded myself that I had the right to make decisions about my inheritance, that my father's wishes were clear, and that manipulation could not dictate my actions. I focused on staying calm, observing every gesture and tone, collecting mental notes about who was trying to influence me and how. I watched as my mom, sitting across from me, subtly shifted her position, leaning slightly forward, her smile fixed but her eyes calculating. I felt a shiver run down my spine. The person I had trusted the most was leading this pressure campaign, and I was at the center of it. Pause, and then it happened. My mom leaned forward, her tone deceptively soft, and said something that made my heart skip. I could feel the room holding its breath, waiting for my reaction. It was a moment that seemed small, almost casual, but I knew instinctively that it was pivotal, a turning point in the delicate balance of control, trust, and power that this meeting had become. My mind raced, analyzing the implications, preparing for my next move, knowing that one misstep could change everything. Her words hit me like a dagger, slicing through the tentative calm I had been trying to maintain. She implied, ever so subtly, that if I didn't comply with their expectations, I'd be betraying the memory of my father. The implication wasn't overt, it was wrapped in a tone of disappointment, a gentle reminder of loyalty and love, but it stung far deeper than any direct accusation could. My cousins, sitting around the table, nodded ever so slightly, echoing the sentiment without saying a word. That tiny gesture transformed the room. Suddenly, the friendly, familial atmosphere was gone. What had seemed like a discussion had turned into a trap I couldn't walk away from. I felt the walls closing in, each glance and smile now a subtle threat, a reminder that I was being tested on every level. I tried to reason. I explained my responsibilities, the plans I had for the inheritance, the practical steps I wanted to take to honor my father's legacy. I thought careful reasoning, transparency, and logic might soften them. But each explanation, no matter how measured, was twisted. In their eyes, I became selfish, unreasonable, and cold. Every word I spoke seemed to feed their narrative. I was the one causing conflict, the one refusing to share, the one risking family harmony. My heart pounded as I realized reasoning alone was not going to protect me. I could no longer rely on trust or good intentions. I needed a plan. Pause, my mom's voice, soft yet firm, carried through the room like honey coating poison. Her tone lulled the casual observer into thinking it was caring advice, while the real message was clear: comply or be accused of betrayal. I could feel my stomach tightening, panic threatening to rise, and yet I forced myself to stay composed. My childhood trust, The certainty I had once placed in her guidance felt like it was slipping through my fingers. Every tactic they used, phrases, glances, subtle nods, even the timing of their pauses, felt rehearsed, practiced, as though they had been planning this moment for months, maybe years. It was a performance, and I was the central figure in a show I had never signed up for. I realized I couldn't act on emotion alone. Panic would only make me vulnerable. Every hesitation, every twitch, could be interpreted as weakness. I needed strategy, patience, and a way to protect myself. So, quietly, I started gathering evidence in my mind, documenting everything they said, every subtle attempt to manipulate me. I noted phrases, gestures, pauses, the micro-expressions that revealed their true intentions. It was painstaking, but I knew that knowledge would be my armor. Even as I did this, I noticed subtle shifts in their posture. They were beginning to sense my resistance. My mom, who had seemed so confident, leaned slightly forward, eyes narrowing just enough to show that she had realized I wasn't as malleable as she had assumed. Cousins exchanged quick glances, the air around them tense, calculating. I felt the tension ripple through the room, the stakes rising with every heartbeat. It was clear, this wasn't just a conversation anymore, it was a battle, a test of wills, a psychological chess match. I focused on keeping my breathing steady, on projecting calm, while internally, I was analyzing every possible scenario. I reminded myself of my boundaries, the clear line I could not cross. But I also had to plan for escalation, for how they might push further. My father's inheritance wasn't just money, it was leverage, and they were attempting to use it against me. The more I observed, the more I understood the depth of their intentions. They were not just asking, they were strategizing, attempting to corner me emotionally and socially. And then it happened. That moment came suddenly, almost like the air itself changed. Their subtle ganging up turned into something more direct. Eyes flicked, voices softened, gestures became pointed, and I realized I was being maneuvered into a corner. My mind raced, trying to calculate the safest response, while the room waited, holding its breath, for me to falter. Every muscle tensed, every thought sharpened, as I understood this was the real escalation. They weren't content with subtle pressure anymore. The next move was coming, and it was designed to force me into a decision. The ultimatum hit me like a bombshell, sudden and unrelenting. Either I agreed to distribute part of the inheritance immediately, or they would brand me greedy, selfish, ungrateful, the black sheep of the family. The words cut deep, slicing through my confidence and turning the people I loved into adversaries in an instant. My chest tightened, panic clawing at me, but deep down, I knew giving in would be a mistake. It would be the first step toward losing not just money, but control over my life. I had to navigate this carefully, balancing diplomacy with firm boundaries, and every response needed to be measured. They began twisting my words, turning my explanations into evidence of selfishness. I tried to justify my plans, calmly outlining how I intended to manage the inheritance responsibly, but each sentence was met with a calculated glare or a whispered comment among my cousins. Their voices were soft, almost casual, but the intent was clear: manipulate me into a corner. They brought up my father constantly, evoking memories of his guidance, his love, his wishes, as if loyalty to him required immediate compliance. Each reference felt like a weapon pointed straight at my conscience. The atmosphere grew thicker, heavier with tension. What had started as a family discussion was now a battlefield disguised as civility. Heated whispers passed among them under the guise of casual conversation, glances exchanged in silent coordination. I could almost see the mental strategies unfolding, the subtle shifts in posture, the measured timing of each comment, the careful nods to reinforce shared intentions. Every detail mattered. Every pause, every word, could be interpreted as a crack in my resolve. I recognized patterns I had only read about in books on manipulation, patterns I never imagined facing personally, and suddenly, the stakes became horrifyingly real. I reminded myself to stay calm. Emotion could be used against me, so I drew a mental line, a boundary I could not cross. I focused on observing, listening, and absorbing everything. Their attempts at guilt, their orchestrated whispers, and the selective glances all became data. Each one revealed more about their strategies, about the depth of their planning. It was a subtle war, one fought not with words alone but with psychology, and I realized that understanding it was my only defense. I also began mentally cataloging their personalities, the ones prone to pressure tactics, the ones who tried to appear neutral but subtly reinforced the group's agenda. My mind became a ledger of intentions, noting contradictions, observing which arguments resonated and which fell flat. Each manipulation, each emotional push, became an opportunity to understand the bigger picture. My fear, though still present, was tempered by awareness. I wasn't powerless, I just had to play it strategically, silently gathering strength while they assumed I was flustered. The room felt suffocating, like the walls themselves were closing in. I could sense the subtle escalation, the way my mom's eyes flicked to gauge my reaction, the way cousins whispered and nodded, all creating a unified front. My heart pounded, adrenaline surging, but I reminded myself to breathe, to anchor in reason, not emotion. I knew that any overt reaction could give them control, could make them feel victorious before the meeting had even ended. Then, amidst their coordinated pressure, I saw my chance, a small, fleeting opportunity to gather undeniable proof. One cousin let slip a phrase that revealed the underlying motive behind all their tactics. My mom, unaware that I had noticed, subtly confirmed it with a nod. My mind snapped into action, carefully noting every word, every inflection, every gesture, as though building an invisible record I could use later. I realized I was no longer just defending myself, I was collecting the evidence I needed to expose the truth when the time was right. The realization brought a strange mix of relief and anticipation. I could survive this confrontation, not by yielding, but by staying vigilant, observing, and preparing. The more I watched, the more cracks I saw in their performance, the tiny inconsistencies, the fleeting signs of uncertainty. Their overconfidence became their weakness. I knew that patience and strategy, combined with the proof I was collecting, would ultimately give me the upper hand. For the first time, I felt a sense of control amidst the chaos, a quiet strength rising from within. I straightened in my chair, maintaining a neutral expression while mentally preparing my next moves. They didn't realize that I was no longer just reacting, I was anticipating, plotting, and waiting for the right moment to shift the balance in my favor. The meeting had escalated to a point where surrender was not an option, and every tactic they used only reinforced my resolve. I couldn't lose, not to them, not to this betrayal. Every detail mattered, every reaction was critical, and the evidence I was gathering would be my shield. I realized I needed to act carefully, and quietly, if I wanted to survive this family storm. Started recording conversations, saving messages, and noting every behavior that revealed their true intentions. Every slip, every glance, every subtle manipulation became part of a growing record. I had to balance awareness with discretion. One wrong move, and they might realize I was gathering evidence, turning the situation against me. My hands shook slightly at first, but I reminded myself that this was about more than just money, it was about uncovering the truth of who my family really was. As I pieced together their plans, patterns emerged. I could almost predict their next tactic, the way they would lean in, phrase questions, or use emotional cues to see if I wavered. It was astonishing, in a horrifying way, how coordinated they were. The room that had once felt like a trap was slowly transforming in my mind into a stage, one where I would later have the power to expose the motives behind their carefully crafted manipulation. Each recorded conversation, each documented exchange, felt like adding another layer of armor around me. I began to feel a strange mix of fear and control. On one hand, I was surrounded by people I had trusted my entire life, people who were using subtle pressure and guilt to push me into submission. On the other hand, I had knowledge they didn't suspect I was collecting. That knowledge gave me strength. Each moment of betrayal, each sly comment meant less power to them because I was ready. I noticed tiny cracks in their facades, the way a cousin's hand twitched when a plan was suggested, or how my mom's smile faltered ever so slightly if I didn't respond the way they expected. I wrote all of it down in my mind, storing evidence piece by piece. The psychological load was heavy. It was exhausting to maintain calm while observing, documenting, and anticipating the next move. Every interaction required careful attention. I had to react naturally while still watching for manipulation, ensuring no one could detect my awareness. But as I continued, I felt the tide shifting subtly. I wasn't just the target anymore, I was becoming the observer, the strategist. The room that had once felt oppressive now offered glimpses of opportunity. I could sense moments where a poorly chosen phrase or a revealing gesture might give me undeniable proof of their intentions. Pause. With every passing second, my mental ledger of evidence grew. I captured words, expressions, and behavioral patterns, recognizing when someone attempted to sway me emotionally or socially. It was painstaking work, but documenting it mentally kept me grounded. I felt a flicker of satisfaction knowing that one day, all this manipulation could be exposed. Even as my heart raced with fear, I realized that I had regained some control. The family meeting, which had felt like a trap, was now a space where I could quietly turn the dynamics in my favor. The more I uncovered, the deeper the deception appeared to run. It wasn't just about money, it was about influence, perception, and loyalty. My relatives had been carefully orchestrating attempts to control me for weeks, maybe months, without me realizing it. I had underestimated their ability to manipulate, and I knew that one misstep could undo everything I had documented so far. But awareness, paired with careful observation, gave me an edge. I felt myself becoming more confident in my ability to navigate the situation, to anticipate their moves, and to protect myself from their schemes. And then, I sensed it, a subtle shift in the room's energy. They were beginning to notice it too, my newfound calm, my quiet confidence, my refusal to react emotionally. Heads turned slightly, glances flicked in my direction, and the subtle tension in the room grew thicker. I could almost see them recalculating, realizing that I was no longer as vulnerable as they had assumed. The stakes were escalating. The more I documented, the more careful I had to be, but also, the more power I quietly accumulated. I straightened in my chair, taking a slow breath to steady my nerves. The evidence was piling up. The room's atmosphere was changing, and I could feel that the balance of power was shifting, even if they didn't yet realize it. Every word, every look, every subtle gesture was a piece of the puzzle that would protect me and reveal the truth when the time was right. The storm was far from over, but I knew I was no longer just a participant. I was a strategist, a silent observer, and perhaps, for the first time in the meeting, the one in control. Just when I thought I had control, my mom dropped a bomb I never saw coming. In a voice as calm and collected as ever, she revealed that she had known I was documenting everything, the recordings, the observations, the mental notes I had meticulously collected. The words hit like ice water, freezing the room instantly. My siblings and cousins shifted uncomfortably, exchanging nervous glances, their coordinated confidence suddenly faltering. The dynamic I had been relying on, my quiet control, my strategic advantage, had been anticipated. Suddenly, the balance of power shifted again, this time sharply in their favor, but with cracks I could exploit. It wasn't just manipulation anymore, it was psychological warfare. Every strategy one had silently employed was no longer hidden. I could feel my pulse spike, my mind racing, and yet I knew I had to act quickly. I had to balance honesty with caution, pretending to be unaware of their awareness while recalibrating my plan. Any visible panic, any rash reaction, would give them the upper hand. I forced myself to take a slow, deliberate breath, grounding in the knowledge that awareness and composure were my greatest weapons. As I observed them, I began to notice tiny cracks in their facade. My mom's calm was just that, a carefully maintained exterior. For a brief flicker of a moment, guilt flashed across her eyes, followed by a subtle tightening of her jaw. My cousins, who had been so confident moments ago, hesitated in their responses, their forced smiles flickering into fleeting discomfort. My siblings, trying to appear neutral, exchanged whispered looks, betraying their nervousness. These were small, almost imperceptible slips, but in a room full of calculated strategy, they were huge. I realized that overconfidence could be my leverage, even in this sudden reversal. I had always believed that family meant trust and safety, that love would protect me. Now, I understood that in a family where trust was weaponized, control came not from aggression or reaction, but from awareness, patience, and restraint. I could no longer rely on assumptions about loyalty or intent. I had to act based on observation, evidence, and strategy. This revelation was unsettling, but it was also empowering. For the first time, I truly saw the depth of the game I was involved in, and the power I had, quietly, to influence its outcome. My mind raced to adapt. I considered the options before me: confront them directly, continue gathering subtle proof, or strategically assert boundaries to regain psychological leverage. I weighed each choice carefully, knowing that one misstep could undo everything I had built. The shock of my mom's revelation had the potential to destabilize me, but instead, I chose to view it as an opportunity. The very tactic they used to regain control had created openings for me to redirect the energy back in my favor. I observed how each person in the room responded to the revelation. My mother, attempting to maintain composure, was already planning her next move, trying to read my reaction. My cousins were whispering under their breath, trying to calculate what their next steps should be. My siblings were frozen, unsure whether to support the family front or hedge their bets with me. And there I was, silently taking note, every flicker of emotion, every hesitation, every micro-expression, storing it for future use. I was no longer just reacting, I was recalibrating, turning the twist into an advantage. I understood one crucial thing in that moment: this wasn't a simple battle over money. It was a test of perception, control, and emotional intelligence. The inheritance, the pressure, the guilt, they were all tools, but the ultimate control lay in maintaining awareness and restraint. I had to appear unshaken, even while my mind worked overtime to plot the next moves. One false reaction, and the advantage could slip away again. But I could see the cracks forming in their overconfidence, and I knew the moment to act was approaching. I straightened in my chair, taking a deliberate breath, forcing my face into a neutral expression. I had processed the shock, recalibrated my strategy, and identified the openings created by their overreach. The revelation had shifted the power dynamic, yes, but it also gave me clarity, insight, and leverage. I could now plan my next step with precision, knowing exactly how to protect myself while asserting my boundaries. The meeting was far from over, but I could feel the tides beginning to turn in my favor. I took a slow, steadying breath, feeling the weight of the room pressing in on me. I knew the next step had to be clear, deliberate, and unwavering. I calmly set a boundary that left no room for interpretation. I would not hand over any part of my inheritance without full transparency and proper legal documentation. My voice was firm, yet controlled, carefully measured to convey authority without hostility. I explained that this wasn't about selfishness, it was about responsibility, fairness, and protecting the legacy my father had entrusted to me. Immediately, the atmosphere shifted. Subtle gaslighting attempts began, masked as concern and advice. Cousins tilted their heads, offering helpful suggestions, phrased as questions but loaded with pressure. My mom leaned in, voice soft, trying one last emotional plea, painting me as stubborn, uncooperative, even heartless. Each attempt was a test, designed to erode my confidence and break my resolve. I could feel the tension mounting, but I held my ground. For the first time in that meeting, I felt a sense of control. My line was non-negotiable, and I knew it. The clarity of my boundary gave me strength. I positioned myself strategically, both physically and mentally, signaling that I was ready to leave if necessary. I didn't need to raise my voice or make threats. My presence, calm yet resolute, carried the message: I was not yielding, and I would not be manipulated. Every eye in the room flicked toward me, searching for weakness. There was none to find. I could see the subtle signs of frustration ripple through the group. My mom's smile faltered for a split second, her attempts at persuasion losing momentum. Cousins exchanged glances, whispers passing unnoticed to anyone but the observant. They were testing me still, but I had learned to recognize the patterns. I understood now that survival in a manipulative family didn't come from compromise or yielding to emotional pressure, it came from clarity, consistency, and the courage to enforce boundaries, even against those you love the most. The more they tried to twist my words, the stronger I felt. I repeated my stance calmly, each sentence reinforcing the non-negotiable boundary. I will not distribute any portion without full documentation, I said. Simple. Direct. No hesitation. The room shifted again, subtle nods of disbelief, tightening jaws, and fleeting sighs betrayed their growing frustration. They expected confusion, hesitation, or guilt, but instead, I offered quiet confidence. I had reclaimed agency over my finances and my life, and they could sense it. I considered the next step carefully. Walking away from the room, leaving them to stew in their frustration, was a powerful signal. It wasn't aggression, it was self-preservation. I didn't need to argue endlessly or prove myself. Sometimes, the most effective action is silence paired with clarity. I imagined leaving the room calmly, letting the tension speak louder than any words could. Every movement mattered. Every glance and gesture conveyed strength. This was a silent standoff, a battle waged without anger, but with absolute resolve. My mom tried one final emotional push, leaning slightly forward, voice soft and persuasive. But I saw through it instantly. I had learned to identify manipulation in real time. Every phrase, every tone, every calculated pause had been anticipated. I didn't flinch. I didn't engage. I simply restated my boundary and prepared to leave if the pressure escalated further. There was no room for debate, this was my line, and I would not cross it. The sense of empowerment was intoxicating, a stark contrast to the anxiety that had plagued me for hours. By asserting my limits, I reclaimed my power. I could feel it, control returning, grounded in clarity and unwavering resolve. The room still buzzed with tension, but it was now my tension to manage, not theirs to impose. The meeting had become less of a trap and more of a test I was passing by standing firm. I realized that sometimes, in order to survive betrayal from those closest to you, standing your ground is the only way to protect yourself. After I left the meeting, the aftermath began quietly, almost imperceptibly at first. My family didn't confront me openly, they relied on subtle sabotage, rumors, and passive-aggressive comments to unsettle me. Messages arrived from distant relatives, friends, and acquaintances, filled with suggestions that I had been too harsh or unreasonable. Guilt trips were attempted through carefully phrased words, designed to make me question my judgment. But this time, I was prepared. I had documented everything, the conversations, the manipulations, the emotional pressure, and every attempt at control became evidence. I didn't have to fight blindly, the truth was already on my side. The ripple effect was immediate. Friends, lawyers, and even other family members who had been on the sidelines began questioning the intentions behind the schemes. Conversations I wasn't even part of revealed doubts in my relatives' credibility. My meticulously collected records, combined with my calm refusal to yield, lent me an unshakable position. Their attempts to manipulate, which had once filled me with anxiety, now revealed their own weaknesses. Each subtle sabotage, each whispered rumor, only made the truth more obvious. The power had shifted, not through confrontation, but through evidence and integrity. Karma seemed to move with its own timing. Those who tried to pressure me, to twist loyalty into a tool for their gain, faced exposure and loss. Financial negotiations faltered, reputations cracked, and allies I didn't expect began to question the motivations of those who had orchestrated the meeting. The manipulation my mom had orchestrated, the sly emotional pressures from cousins and siblings, all of it began to unravel. I watched from a distance, not with malice, but with quiet satisfaction. The very strategies meant to control me became the instruments of their own undoing. The final confrontation was not a dramatic shouting match or a sudden showdown. It was quiet, undeniable, and entirely based on truth. The evidence I had gathered spoke for itself. Legal clarity, documented conversations, and careful observation became the tools of accountability. I didn't need to raise my voice, the clarity of my actions conveyed everything. When the family realized that manipulation had consequences, it was a shock that rippled through the room. My mom, who had initially orchestrated the trap, had to face the undeniable proof of her own tactics. Her expressions shifted, alternating between surprise, frustration, and a reluctant acknowledgement that her strategy had failed. I felt a mixture of relief and sorrow during that confrontation. Relief, because the threat to my inheritance and autonomy had been neutralized. Sorrow, because it had been my own family, people I had trusted, to orchestrate such manipulation. But alongside both emotions, I felt empowerment. By standing my ground, by documenting the truth, and by maintaining clarity under pressure, I had reclaimed agency. I didn't need revenge. The universe, or karma, had already served justice through exposure and accountability. The chaos and attempts at control my family tried to impose had ultimately backfired. I understood something crucial through all of this: boundaries aren't just lines on a map, they are shields for your well-being. Vigilance isn't paranoia, it's preservation. And intuition, especially in family dynamics, can be more reliable than blind loyalty. Trusting myself, maintaining awareness, and enforcing limits was the only way I could protect what was rightfully mine, while also navigating the complex emotional terrain of family relationships. I realized that confrontation doesn't always have to be explosive. Sometimes it's quiet, methodical, and based on undeniable facts. The respect I gained for myself during this period outweighed any temporary chaos or hurt feelings. I had proven, first to myself and then to the world around me, that integrity and preparation are more powerful than manipulation and intimidation. Every subtle smirk, every whispered attempt at guilt, every pressure tactic was neutralized by awareness, strategy, and patience. It wasn't about winning a fight, it was about surviving a betrayal intact and on my own terms. The knowledge that I had maintained control, even when faced with the most manipulative of family members, was empowering beyond words. In the silence that followed the confrontation, I could finally breathe. I walked away knowing I had survived the ultimate family betrayal. Pause. I didn't need to shout, I didn't need revenge, and I didn't need to force reconciliation. Justice had been served through truth, preparation, and courage. I had protected my inheritance, my dignity, and my peace of mind. And in that quiet victory, I understood the ultimate lesson: survival in a world of manipulation doesn't come from aggression, but from awareness, boundaries, and the strength to stand firm, even when those closest to you attempt to break you. Looking back, the lesson I learned is crystal clear: family love doesn't always equate to unconditional trust. Money can reveal hidden intentions, unmasking those you thought you knew. Survival, I realized, doesn't come from hiding, avoiding conflict, or yielding to pressure. It comes from awareness, preparation, and courage. I learned that documenting, asserting boundaries, and protecting yourself aren't selfish acts, they are essential tools for self-preservation. In the midst of betrayal, clarity and strategy are far more powerful than anger or impulsive reaction. Betrayal hurts in ways that shake you to your core, especially when it comes from the people you love most. But facing it head-on, with a clear mind and careful planning, allows you to emerge unscathed, stronger, and more self-aware. I discovered that empowerment isn't about revenge, it's about standing firm, knowing your worth, and defending it even when it's painful. The inheritance I protected was only part of the story. The greater victory was reclaiming my agency, my dignity, and my peace of mind. Also realized that manipulation often thrives in silence and secrecy. The more you allow subtle pressures to go unnoticed, the more power they have over you. Documenting actions, observing behaviors, and keeping a clear record is not paranoia, it's survival. Maintaining boundaries isn't cruelty, it's self-respect. And courage isn't just about confronting others, it's about maintaining your integrity when the people closest to you attempt to bend you to their will. Life will test trust in unexpected ways. Sometimes, the people who should support you most will challenge your resilience, whether through manipulation, subtle pressure, or overt betrayal. And in those moments, the question becomes, do you surrender to expectation, or do you protect what matters to you most? I learned that strength lies in the latter. Facing betrayal strategically doesn't just shield you, it empowers you to make decisions rooted in clarity rather than fear, ensuring that you survive and thrive even when the situation seems overwhelming. If there's one message I want you to take from my story, it's this: empowerment comes from knowing your worth, asserting your boundaries, and defending yourself without apology. It comes from understanding that trust is earned, not assumed, and that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite it. My story isn't just about inheritance, family drama, or betrayal, it's about recognizing when manipulation is at play, responding with clarity, and emerging stronger on the other side. These principles apply to every relationship, every challenge, and every unexpected test life throws your way. And now, I want to turn the focus to you, my viewers. Have you ever faced a situation where family or loved ones tried to manipulate you? How did you respond, and what would you do differently now if faced with a similar situation? Sharing your experiences can be powerful, not just for you, but for someone else who might be navigating a storm of their own. Reflection, strategy, and dialogue are all tools that can help someone survive betrayal, protect themselves, and reclaim their power. Remember, strength isn't revenge. Strength is surviving the betrayal, standing firm in your truth, and thriving despite the challenges others impose on you. Your worth is yours to protect. Your boundaries are your armor. And your courage, when paired with clarity and preparation, is the force that allows you to navigate even the most manipulative relationships without losing yourself. Life will test you, trust will be challenged, and sometimes those closest to you may surprise you, but with awareness, vigilance, and courage, you can face it all and come out stronger.